Australia is known for featuring some of the most dangerous animals to ever evolve on this planet. But what would you say is the most dangerous of them all? Depending on who you ask, some may say the funnel web spider, the box jellyfish, the tie-pin snake, the blue-ringed octopus, or the cone snail. If you ask me, I'd say the duck-billed platypus. I know what you're thinking. What's so dangerous about the silly-looking beaver duck? And a few years ago, I'd probably be thinking the same thing as you are. But I know from experience that platypi are no laughing matter. My older brother Derek learned that the hard way a couple years ago. I still miss Derek. I think about him constantly. Had I known what would have happened to him, I never would have let him go out that day. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the summer of 2018, Derek took me into the woods in our backyard to go fishing in a nearby river. I was 16 and he was 18 at the time. As soon as we arrived, my brother pointed to the big rock on the riverbank. "Look," he shouted with excitement. Laying on the rock, basking in the sun, was a big brown platypus. The animal had its eyes closed and didn't seem to hear us. We had occasionally seen platypi swimming in the river from a distance, but this was the first time we had ever seen one up close. "That's odd," I said, scratching my head with bewilderment. "Don't they usually rest in burrows? I've never seen a platypus out here in the open like this." I turned to Derek and nearly dropped my fishing rod when I noticed him creeping close to the sleeping animal with one hand extended. "Derek, what are you doing?" I hissed. "I'm just gonna touch it real quick," he replied. "I want to see how its fur feels." "Don't," I said back. "We're not supposed to touch wildlife, remember?" "It's a platypus," he said calmly. "What's it going to do?" As soon as he placed his fingers on the creature's back, he let out a loud yell in pain. The platypus had jumped, startled by Derek's hand, before leaping off the rock and darted back into the water. I got a brief glimpse of a torn-like spike on one of the animal's hind legs, tipped with Derek's blood, before it dove out of sight. I turned to Derek as he groaned in pain, grabbing his bleeding wrist with his other hand as he gritted his teeth. "This is why we're not supposed to touch wildlife," I shouted at him. I know, he cried. "Just get me home quickly and help me bandage up the wound." I dragged Derek home and told our parents what had happened. We then helped him wash the wound, put disinfectant ointment on it, and wrapped it in a bandage. An hour later, I checked back on him and asked him how he was feeling. He told me that even though the bleeding stopped, his hand still hurt like crazy, and he could feel the swelling in the area the platypus stabbed him. As you can probably guess, I was starting to get concerned. I called the hospital and told them about the whole situation. The lady on the other end explained to me that the male platypus had a venomous spur on each hind leg, and that while it isn't deadly to humans, it is extremely painful, and due to how rare platypus stings are, there's been very little research done on their venom, and thus very little I could do to help my brother. No painkillers could alleviate it, unless we injected a deadly amount of morphine, and the only way to stop it completely would be to sever the nerve where the animal stung him. She went on to tell me the best thing to do would be to keep him inside, give him plenty of water, and keep an eye on his wound. I thanked her for the advice and hung up. For the next few days, Derek got worse and worse. Every night, I could hear the most horrific screams, cries, and moans I have ever heard from a human coming from his room. I would do my best to cover my ears as one or both of our parents would go to comfort him. Whenever I went to check on him in the morning, I would notice huge gashes dug into his plaster wall. Derek's fingertips would be bleeding and his nails worn down from scratching into the wall. He also had bite marks from his own teeth on his wrist. and blood all over his face from chewing on his lips and tongue. His swelling was getting worse and was beginning to leak foul-smelling pus. One night, I noticed Derek was quieter than usual. I went to his room to check on him and found it empty. I then heard a loud horse breathing sound coming from the kitchen downstairs and ran down to check. The sight before me nearly made me vomit. Derek was standing by the counter, his expression stoic and his eyes bloodshot. In one hand, he held our father's Bowie knife, which he was using to carve into his swollen wrist. He had already cut down to the bone, and a pool of blood was forming on the counter and dripping onto the floor. "Derek," I said, struggling to speak. What are you doing?" He turned to me, letting out raspy pants every second. "I can't take it anymore," he said, his voice just about a whisper. "It hurts. I have to stop it." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and called 000. An ambulance came to rush him to the emergency room. As the paramedics dragged him into the ambulance, he screamed and demanded them to let him finish amputating himself. The next day, I heard back from the hospital. While they had succeeded in fixing the damage the knife caused to Derek's wrist, he was still in horrible pain from the venom. He was continuing to scream and moan and cry, outright begging the hospital staff to kill him and permanently end his agony. Since painkillers wouldn't do any good when it came to platypus venom, the doctors briefly considered amputating his hand. However, since it had been a few days since he had been stung, the venom had probably spread to the rest of his body by now, so amputation wouldn't do any good. They decided the best thing to do was to keep him under watch and to see if his symptoms got better or worse. The staff sent me and my parents security videos of Derek in the hospital room. Each one was worse than the last one. Some of them showed Derek merely laying in bed, making horrible animalistic cries and moans. Others showed him biting or scratching himself violently. Still, others showed him running to the door and screaming for the staff to kill him. We also heard reports of Derek physically attacking hospital staff and leaving horrible bites and scratches on them. Eventually, my mother told the hospital to stop sending us the videos. We had seen enough. 1 year passed. The hospital would send us an occasional update on Derek's condition, with longer spans of time between each update. We rarely talked about Derek at home, but we thought about him constantly. We all sunk into a terrible depression and rarely ate or slept. Just last year, they told us that since there was no sign of him improving physically or mentally, they would have no choice but to euthanize him. They would allow us one more visit before they did so. Derek was barely recognizable as the same person I had known for all my childhood. He was strapped to the hospital bed to keep him from harming himself and others. His body was pale and emaciated, as if he hadn't had a proper meal in years. His fingertips had dry blood in place of nails. His face, oh God, his face. His lids were shut, having gouged out his own eyes a while back. His lips were torn, exposing his pale pink gums. His teeth had been ground down to their roots, and his tongue had been chewed off. Every single hair on his head had been pulled out, showing his pale, bloody scalp, as his vocal cords had been torn to shreds from screaming so much. He was no longer able to speak, just produce raspy breathing sounds. Even though he couldn't scream anymore, we knew he was still in horrible pain. None of us could look at him much longer. Even after his funeral, the sight of him strapped to the hospital bed still haunts my nightmares, along with those horrible screams and moans he made when he was still able to speak. However, I took one photo of Derek during our last visit. Whenever I want to warn people how dangerous platypi are and they don't believe my story, all I have to do is show them that photo of the emaciated, deformed figure in the hospital bed. That's all it takes to convince them to give platypuses a wide berth. Sure, the venom itself didn't kill Derek, but I wish it had, before he'd gotten as bad as he was. I still sometimes go by the river where that fateful incident occurred, and I sometimes see a platypus or two swimming by. Every time I see one, I immediately turn and dash back home, because all I can think about whenever I see one of those odd little critters is Derek, and the brutal lesson he taught me about messing with wildlife, no matter how harmless or silly it seems. My unholy seductress whispered my name at night, her dark soft voice billowing out over her soft pink tongue, her tongue that emerged from her sharpened teeth and rolled over her full red lips. I won't get into when she first started appearing to me, except to say that she always came at night. It didn't matter if I locked the closet door with a deadbolt or hung crucifixes across the entryway. She came regardless. A sickly, dim red light glowed murderously through the cracks in the closet doorway, and my bedroom grew pungent with brimstone. The deadbolt simply melted, and the Christ figures on the crucifixes began to laugh or weep before bursting into flames. Then the door opened, and I tried not to look, but I always did, peering over the top of my blanket to behold her sensual red and black form, gently writhing in the closet doorway. Previously, I'd shout and plead and beg for her to leave me alone, but that never worked. These days, I could only try to force my head back under the blanket, trying to ignore the horrid and beautiful and profane poses she struck at the foot of my bed, giggling her dark giggle all the while. She could have taken me, I suppose, but I don't think she ever wanted that. Instead, she wanted me to want her to want me. And in my weakest moments, sometimes I feared that's exactly what I wanted. I shut my eyes and pulled the blanket tight around my face, but my desire for her was unmistakable. Show me a man. No. Show me a person on this earth who could resist fantasizing about her lithe, red naked form, and I'll show you a liar. Her long red prehensile tail rolled across the soles of my feet, as if daring me to look upon her. I shut my eyes tighter and gnawed on my bottom lip, and the moment I began to doze, I felt her tongue flick across my earlobe, or I felt it flick across my throat, and she giggled when she felt the meager beat of my heart through my delicious corroded artery. God help me, more than once, I nearly begged for her to take a bite. When I did peek out from under the protective blanket, she grinned widely and ran her sharp talons down her supple naked frame, tempting me with the gash of her sex, an alluring sight that dripped human blood and stank of burning sulfur, yet never failed to make my mouth water. Her murder-red skin was covered in shifting black tattoos, like shadows dancing across her naked body. And while she always came at night, she was by no means limited to coming at night. I've seen her on the highway, as I was driving home from my daily commute to the liquor store, and she waved at me from the shoulder of the road, stretching her black wings wide and curling her talon, beckoning me to her. When I drank at bars, she never failed to materialize across the room, in darkened corners, or peeking at me through the bathroom mirror as I took a piss. When I walked down the street, I'd catch her reflection in storefront windows, trailing mere inches behind me, licking her lips and playing with herself as I tried to ignore her and go about my business. This had been going on for years, but then something about her became different. She grew hungrier, and God help me, I couldn't help but get aroused every time I watched her feed. I never consented to this. She forced me to watch, worming her way into my mind as I slept. Though I resisted, my resolve never lasted very long, and eventually, I couldn't help but groan in delight as I slumbered, as I watched her slaughter and defile her victims. I wasn't sure where she took them, except that it appeared to be a small clearing in the forest, thick with conifer trees. At first, I thought these visions were dreams, regardless of how vivid they were. Indeed, in each vision, I could smell the metallic copper stink of warm blood. The awful screams rang out in my eardrums, reverberating down to my soul. I swore, sometimes as she peeled the flesh from their willing throats, I could even taste the fresh meat, the dangling sinew. So yes, for a time, I was able to convince myself these visions were only fantasies, either dreamed up in my own fractured mind, or deviant desires beamed into my thoughts by my unholy seductress. However, eventually I was no longer able to harbor such delusions. The first victim I knew was a coworker, another clerk from my minimum wage liquor store job. This coworker's name was Dan. I never did like him very much. He was a drunk, with a habit of sneaking drinks into stock rooms, something he always seemed to do at our peak hours when we were the busiest. One night, as I slept, I suffered yet another vision, blurry but gradually growing clearer. It was the clearing again, dead leaves littering the ground and naked conifers shivering in the wind. She walked into the clearing. Behind her, Dan followed. Though his eyes were glazed and his jaw was slackened, his face burned with unmistakable willingness as he walked sheepishly behind her, licking his lips and brandishing an erection in his pants. The thing she did to him. It was merely a murder, nor was it sexual. Instead, the vile act lay somewhere in between a perverse and violent gray area, a grisly act of copulation and defilement, during which Dan lay on the barren earth, his blood flowing over those scattered dead leaves, screaming in both agony and ecstasy as she writhed and heaved, as she pulled him apart inch by bloody inch, crowning herself with his esophagus as she gnawed slowly through his exposed viscera. The following morning, I wanted more than anything to know that it had only been a nightmare. I went into work praying that Dan would come in for his shift, but I wasn't altogether surprised when he hadn't. For a week, instead of visiting me in my bedroom, she would only come to me in my dreams, grinning up at me as she led another person I knew into the clearing. My high school history teacher, who died grinning madly as she ripped his throat out. My very first real girlfriend from college who was devoured from the bottom up, screaming in anguish for over an hour before she finally expired. My mailman, my neighbor from around the corner, my landlord, all of them torn apart, wet clumps of flesh being ripped and flung and devoured. Then, just last night, I decided I had enough. No, it wasn't that I could no longer bear witness to her vile feedings. That wasn't it at all. Instead, I found my jealousy was nearly uncontrollable. She hadn't been to my bedroom for a week, preferring instead to haunt my dreams, making me admire her lithe, nubile demonic body from my mind's eye. Funny, for years, I wanted nothing more than to be rid her nightly torment. Now that she was gone, I wanted nothing more than to have her return to me. I swallowed an unreasonable amount of over-the-counter trucker speed, caffeine, niacin, and ephedrine. My face flushed red. I paced my bedroom, my heart twitching uneasily in my chest. I stared at my closet door, praying that I'd see the murderous red glow, praying that I'd smell that stinking brimstone one more time. This time, she came in through my bedroom door. I heard the squealing hinges behind me, smelled the sulfur wafting up from her sex, heard her bare feet slipping quietly upon the hardwood floor. Then, I heard something else. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of something wet striking the floorboards. My shuddering heart seemed to drop as I somehow already knew what I was going to see. I turned around to face her. She grinned at me, gore smeared across her mouth, red on red, her eyes shimmering golden, flaring golden, like I was staring into twin morning stars. She held my mother's decapitated head in her right hand. Her sharp talons tangled in my mother's matted gray hair. I lowered my head, wiped the tears from my eyes, and muttered the words, "I've missed you so much." She took my cheek into her hand, talons resting sharply against my soft flesh, the skin of her palm sizzling against my own, and I shut my eyes tight, teeth clenched, trying not to cry out at the pain, at the melting flesh and the boiling fat. I looked up at her grinning gore-smeared face, and I swore I'd never seen anything half as stunning. She kissed me, long and soft and sensual, her tongue dancing upon my own as she slipped my mother's clotted gore into my mouth. As her lips closed around mine, she giggled an evil, vicious giggle and shot into my mind the final moments of my mother's life. Finally, she broke our kiss. My unholy seductress grinned down at me as she licked her lips clean, then her cheeks, then her chin with an elongated forked tongue the color of charred bones. She blew me a kiss and began to evaporate in a cloud of slate-colored smoke. I reached out for my seductress, screaming for her to remain at my side. Yet, my hands passed through the dissipating wisps of smoke and I fell flat on my face, and I wept for my seductress, for I knew she left me for good. Well, not entirely. As I write this, I'm fully aware that I clicked the screen off. I'd seen her in the black reflection, grinning that gore grin, hovering just over my shoulder, holding the decapitated head of a friend or a family member. Not that I have many of those left now. I know that no matter how quickly I might turn around to look, she vanished before I could even turn my naked, desperate eyes back to her supple form. I've come to realize that she has never wanted anything more than to toy with me, to pluck my strings, to make the marionette dance. Even so, I can't help but yearn for her. I can't help but weep angry tears into my pillow each night, knowing that she could visit me again if she wanted, but knowing full well that she never will. I know you're frowning. The title is weird, I know. But if you could just give me a moment, I'll explain. I'll have to be fast though. I don't know how close they are. Essentially, I ordered myself on the dark web. I'm a drug user, I'll admit it. Weed is my usual go-to, but I buy that off my friend. If, however, I want to get something a little heavier, like acid or coke, I just order it off the dark web. It's surprisingly simple. A few clicks, some Bitcoin transfers, and then boom, I have acid in my P.O. box. But I'm also a curious guy. The dark web has always intrigued me. Up until a few days ago, I had only been on there to buy drugs off the sites some of my friends gave to me. But late one night, I was sober and at home, which was a rare thing for me. So, since I was bored, I decided to boot up my Tor browser and try to see what sort of fucked up shit I could find on the dark web. If you've ever been on the dark web, you'll know that you can't just search up red rooms or hitmen for hire and get results. No, you have to find links to these websites first. So I hopped back onto Google again to try and find some links to a messed up website. I know it's weird that I was actively searching for the worst, but as soon as I got on the dark web that night, I had a sense of morbid curiosity overcome me. Anyway, I spent a little while trying to find some links. Anything that I found though was either too tame for me, or the links didn't work. At this point, I was about ready to give up, and I wish I had. But in one final attempt, I clicked on Reddit, hopping onto r/deepweb. I didn't think I'd find anything, so I just scrolled through hot for about half an hour before sorting by new. Then, I found it. One simple text post titled, "Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services." In the text box in the post was what seemed to be just a random assortment of numbers and letters. It took my tired brain a second to figure out what it was, but I realized pretty quickly. It was a link, presumably to a Hitman website. So I decided to paste a link into my dark web browser, and what do you know? It worked. But before I decided to go any further, I figured I should go back to the OP's profile to see if they have posted any other dark web links. However, when I went back to the post in question, OP's profile was deleted. Weird. Anyway, I reopened my dark web tab and hopped onto the site. Up along the top of the website was its name, Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services, and next to it, what looked to be a skull inside of a crosshair. I chuckled when I saw that. The site must be fake. Upon scrolling down, however, I was not disappointed. There was a paragraph of white text on a black background, and a small box to the right of the text that just said, "Place an order." The text was the main part though, as it took up most of the page. It read, Slayer's Assassination and Life-Ruining Services offers everything from acid attack, crippling, blinding, castration, torture, rape, beatings, and good old death. We have the lowest prices out of any other company running similar services, and we are worldwide. We have a dedicated and experienced group of staff based all over the world. So if you need someone to be assassinated, or maybe you just want them scared for life, don't hesitate to contact us. Again, I laughed. This had to be satire, right? Hell, I was even tempted to order it on someone just to see what would happen. Ironically, I actually have a half-decent job, so I can afford to. Better not to risk it though, I thought to myself. I was about to close my computer and call it for a night when I heard a knock at the door. I live alone, so it was unusual to get visitors, especially so late at night, but when I opened my door, it was just my good buddy Mark, who also happened to be my weed plug. As I opened the door, he didn't hesitate to let himself in and shove a big baggie full of pot in my face. This dude is the best shit I've had in a minute. We gotta try some. I couldn't say no. Cut to a couple hours later, it's early morning and Mark and I are chilling on my couch, both blazed as fuck. He suddenly decided to get up, and I assume he's going to get some leftover pizza, but he walks over to my desk and computer. Slayer's Assassinations. Are you gonna kill someone or something? He mutters. What? I reply. Your computer, dude. It's got some hacker shit on it. It's the dark web, man. Don't fuck with it. At this point, I'm still on my couch, half asleep and not paying full attention. However, I sat up pretty fast when he said the words, "Hey man, let's order a hitman on you." I hopped up and walked over to my PC. Part of my brain was screaming no, what the fuck are you doing? But the majority of my brain, which was also the high part, was thinking about how funny it would be to order a hitman on myself. So I agree. I did make him get out of my chair though, because I didn't want him seeing what my credit card numbers were as I transferred some Bitcoin. At the end, after I wrote down all my personal details, like my address, age, and even a photo, I had to select what I wanted to happen to me. I just selected plain old assassination, as it was actually cheaper than some of the other things. I could have paid an extra couple of grand to be beaten before my death, but even my high brain didn't want to splash the cash too much on my own death. God, this is ridiculous. Anyway, I placed the order and then replied to a confirmation email and boom, it was done. A couple of clicks and I had ordered myself on the dark web. Mark and I laughed about it for a while, but then he left about an hour later and I fell asleep not too long after. I woke up around 9 a.m., which meant I got at least 6 hours of sleep, even if it felt like I got 3. I got up and got out of bed, threw on some track pants and cotton shirt, and brewed myself a coffee before sitting down to play some games and just enjoy my Sunday. You can imagine how shocked I was when I saw that I had ordered my death the previous night. Even though I thought the site was bullshit, I still felt a pit open up in my stomach. Even when I'm high, I usually can make sensible decisions. I chuckled. Not like I could remember it anyway, but I guess Mark's new shit really was good. I would assume a normal human being would do something else, but I was still kind of out of it from the night before, so I just carried on with my day. I was a little more paranoid, sure, but as I said, I just assumed it was bullshit. I even laughed at the email I got from the website, saying that their hitman has been dispatched and was on its way. It was like ordering a package off Amazon. I was tempted to email back and ask for same-day delivery, but I didn't need to ask because that's exactly what I got. I didn't see it arrive, but around the time I started to cook myself a shitty dinner, I noticed a blacked-out sedan parked on the other side of the road from my house. I didn't live in a rural area, but there was a lot of trees and bushes between each of the houses on my street, so I would be surprised if any other house saw the car except for mine. At this point, I was freaking out. What if the site was real? Even though I'm a big guy, I was freaking out. I don't own any weapons, aside from a slightly larger than average kitchen knife. Fuck it. I'm confronting it, I decided. I put on a hoodie and slid the knife into the front pocket before waltzing on out of my house and walking right up to the driver's side window of the vehicle. Even I was astonished at my own courage. Knocking on the window, nothing happened. It was rather anticlimactic. I was fully prepared to have to fight for my life, all because I did something really dumb while I was baked. But, like I said, nothing happened. I even put my head right up to the window, as if there was a reflection, to try and get a better look to see what's inside. I could barely see what was inside of the car, but all I could make out were 2 empty seats. No one was even inside. I had got all hyped up for nothing. I decided to wait out by the car for a bit, but after a half hour or so, I was hungry and had to go back inside and take my dinner out of the oven. I swear, it was only a minute between me going inside to take my dinner out of the oven and looking back out of the window, and the car being gone. I didn't even hear it go. Guess I'm eating my dinner with all my curtains closed and doors locked, I muttered to myself. I had just started to calm down when the power shut off. It was sunny outside, and coupled with the car, I now knew this was the real deal. I had signed my own death warrant. I ran into my upstairs bedroom and locked the door, and then hid under the bed. I couldn't call the cops. What would I say? Oh yes, hello sir. Turns out while I was super high, I paid $5,000 for some anonymous hitman to kill me, and now he's arrived. Send an officer ASAP, please and thank you. So I just stayed hiding under my bed, and I still am now. I've been here for an hour now writing this. Think of this as my epitaph. I know I'm screwed. Just a minute ago, I heard my back door slowly creak open. This piece of writing may seem humorous to you, the reader, but in reality, as you read this, I'm under my bed praying to a God that lost all faith in me years ago to spare me, to let me go. But I know that won't happen. My bedroom door just opened and I can see a big pair of black boots. I'd worked as a police dispatcher for 9 years of my life. It's a career that takes a level of mental fortitude that I don't think many possess. I used to hate saying stuff like that, always thought it sounded so pretentious. But the truth is, it takes a special type of person to be willing to voluntarily listen to some of the things we have to hear every single day. Don't get me wrong, the job wasn't always grim, and it even had its decent moments. I've got enough decently funny drunk 911 call stories to last me several lifetimes. though the reality of the job was usually far darker. I understood that though, and felt that I was more than equipped to deal with anything the job could throw at me. I was right, for a while. For years, I had answered every single call, always able to keep a steady head despite being faced with some horrific situations. My confidence in my ability to handle the job was unwavering, until the final call I ever took as a police dispatcher. I glanced at the time displayed at the corner of my computer screen. 11:43. I yawned, leaning backward in my chair with my arms extended as I stretched my back. I'd been at the desk since 3 in the afternoon, answering calls and dispatching officers as they were needed, which wasn't very often in this town. I lived in a little port town in Washington, about an hour or so out of Seattle, and though we weren't without our fair share of crime, our phones never rang off the hook, which meant a lot of free time for me. I was always okay with that. As soul-wrenching as many of the calls could be, moments of respite were always more than welcome. A notification on my screen caught my attention, and in an instant, I had returned to my seat, headset on. 911, what is your emergency? I spoke into my headset as automatically as any line repeated hundreds of thousands of times can be spoken. For a moment, the line was only dead silence before I heard a reply. I need a policeman. I think somebody is in my house. A child whispered from the other line. I felt the smallest of knots begin to form in my stomach. I shifted in my seat. Do you know your address? I asked, adopting a firm but lighter tone in response to the caller's age. I heard shuffling and heavy breathing from the other end, followed by a faint, "Wait." The caller returned and whispered their address. She was a little girl by the sound of her voice, and she sounded scared. Good job. What about your phone number? The process repeated, and I quickly relayed her information to dispatched officers. Her address was on the edge of town, a little out of the way, and I understood that it may be a while before help arrived. I stifled a sigh, not wanting to vocalize my worry as I received an estimated arrival time. Is there an adult with you in the house? I continued. No, the little girl replied breathlessly, and I could hear the anxiety rising in her voice as she spoke. My mom works late, and my sister, There was a pause, followed by an audible sniffle. She's camping with her friends, and... Somewhere on her end of the line, there was a crash, then a scream. My heart dropped. Are you still there? Are you alright? There was a repetitive thumping sound, followed by the slam of a door. I'm here. The little girl spoke breathlessly into the phone. Are you alright? I repeated the question. Yes, was all she replied, barely above a whisper. Her tone worried me. She sounded more than afraid. Sad? No. Disturbed was a proper word for it. Then she began to cry. Not as quiet as you would expect, given her situation, but a deep, helpless sob that made my heart sink. When she spoke, it stopped altogether. Please, please, please help me. Her sobs turned into a hysterical cry, and I could hear loud, repetitive thumps from her end. Footsteps, and they were clearly not hers. They were heavy, far too heavy for a little girl. Without warning, a shrill cry, like the sound of microphone feedback, rang through my headset. The sudden assault of my ears caused me to jump, and my heart set off to racing like a jackrabbit. I fought the instinct to throw the headset off, and instead clenched my eyes shut as the noise faded as suddenly as it had come. I saw it, she sputtered through sobs. Oh, please, please, I don't know what it is. The frantic and frenzied nature of her begging increased, and a strangeness began to settle in the air that I couldn't quite place. A quick glance around the room confirmed that most of the desks around me were empty, and I was on the call alone. The thought made me feel very isolated, and a growing uneasiness continued to take hold of me that I couldn't place. Something about the call just felt wrong. police are on the way, I began. I tried to infuse the statement with my usual level of assertiveness and confidence, but I worried the uneasiness may be audible in my voice. Can you tell me your name? I asked. Amber. Alright, Amber. Are you or can you get somewhere safe? A room with a door you can lock? I'm in my room, she said through sniffles, and it was obvious that she had been crying profusely. I locked the door. Good. I'm gonna stay with you on the line. Is there anywhere for you to hide? The sound of footsteps grew in the background as her voice lowered to a whisper. I think under the bed, she whimpered. Okay, is there? I paused, thinking over my words before continuing. Anything you can use to protect yourself? There was silence on her end for a moment, followed by a hush. Yes. As she dropped the phone, I assumed to get a weapon. The clamor from within the house had grown close to the phone, and the piercing ringing sound had returned. I was almost certain there had to be something wrong with my headset or with Amber's phone, and the sound grew to an almost unbearable extent, matched only by defending thuds from somewhere on the phone. It sounded too close. I could feel the hairs begin to rise on the back of my neck, and the ominous sense of panic began to give way to an unexplained fear. The urge to look over my shoulder grew harder to fight, as the persistent thudding sound grew louder, nearer. It all sounded too clear, I guess. There was no static, none of the white noise typical of a phone call. Nothing. Just the sound of footsteps approaching closer, closer. I gave in to my instinct, whipping around in my seat, nearly losing my headset. No one. I had no time to settle my nerves, as Amber returned to the line. Are you there? She whispered, yanking me from the fog and back into the moment. Yes, I replied. I struggled to shake off my fears. Something was very wrong with this situation. Despite my worries, I shifted my attention back to Amber. There wasn't any weapons, the girl muttered, but I have something. There was a pause. Okay, what do you have? I asked, realizing my prompt was necessary. A rabbit? A pink rabbit, she said, and even over the phone, I could hear a little embarrassment. My dad gave her to me when I was little, she sniffled. He said she would keep me safe. I didn't know what to say for a moment, but didn't want to miss a beat. He was right, I said, as encouragingly as I could. Everyone knows pink bunnies are great protection. Can you go back under? I was interrupted. Amber, I miss you. I could hear a man call from within the house. So the intruder knew her? I furrowed my brow. Amber, do you recognize that voice? I asked, hoping she could identify the intruder. There was a silence for a moment before her response. It sounds like my dad. Why does it sound like my dad? I blinked. What do you mean? That's my daddy's voice. Why does it have my daddy's voice? I didn't know how to respond to that. Hell, I didn't know what to think about. Had his voice? Before I could ask what she meant, we were interrupted by a sound. The thing we heard has taken me years to try to understand. I've come to believe it was that things laugh. At the time though, we couldn't know. It was the sound of metal crunching in a car accident as it met flesh. A wet, grinding shriek that shook me to my core. I wanted to vomit, and my vision began to blur. I can only imagine what it was like for Amber hearing that all in person. Amber? I panted. My senses returned to me all at once. She barely had time to respond before we heard it. A voice, or voices, calling for her from somewhere nearby. They spoke as one, all with the same odd and humane nature, dripping with malatant. Amber. My blood froze. Amber began to cry, and her cries eventually became pleas as she begged for help, her life, her mother, and my intervention. Five more minutes. Just 5 more minutes, I muttered, mentally cursing the timer which displayed the estimated arrival time of the dispatched officers. I prayed it would be soon enough. "It's outside the room," she whispered, her voice one of utter panic, before breaking into a quiet sob. I silently swore under my breath, "Amber, I need you to hide right now if possible. The police are 3 minutes away. Stay as quiet as possible." There was no response, but I assumed from the shuffling sounds I could hear that she had gone back under the bed. For a few moments, there was silence. Then Amber spoke, and my heart dropped. "I'm going to die." "You are not going to die, Amber," I began, worry now audible in my voice. "I promise." It's reaching under the door. Oh my God," she muttered. There was a crash, louder than before, and Amber began to shriek. The noises continued, and it began to dawn on me what I was hearing. It was breaking down the bedroom door. Amber's screams had developed into horrified babbling and pleas for her life to whatever was on the other side of the door. Her screams were soon drowned out by the same noises as before. That sick fucking laughter. "What are you?" Amber shrieked, loud enough to make my ears ring. "Please, what are you?" "What are you?" it mocked, in a voice that was some sick parody of Amber's. Panic gripped me as I glanced back at the corner of the monitor, displaying the dispatch unit's arrival time. 1:36. Please God, let it be soon enough. "Amber, are you there?" I called. "Amber." As suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. Somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. "I hear them, Amber. Officers are a minute away." Silence. My heart began to sink. "Amber, are you there?" I could hear something shifting, breathing. I think it's gone," Amber said. A surge of relief rolled through me, and I let out a sigh and leaned back in the chair. 27 seconds, the dispatch time read, and the sirens in the background grew louder. "You did very well, Amber. Police are almost there. You did really well." I couldn't think of what else to say. I never had a call like this, and something about it all felt so strange. Something Amber had said began to ring in my mind. "What are you?" "Amber," I began. "What did you see?" I was met with silence. "Amber." Amber began to laugh. "Amber," I said, my voice pleading. A wave of realization crashing down on me. The laughter grew more raucous and less human with every second. Somewhere in the background, there was a knocking sound. They'd finally arrived. Too late. I asked the only thing I could think at the moment. "Why?" The laughter stopped abruptly as the thing on the phone spoke. "It was fun." There was a click, and the line went dead. The house was empty when the officers arrived. No signs of forced entry anywhere except the door to Amber's bedroom, the bottom of which had been torn away by something leaving a wide space to crawl beneath. And Amber, or what was left of her, decorated the room. Whatever had been there left nothing behind to identify it, only carnage. The case was never officially closed, and everyone had their theories as to what had happened that day, ranging from serial killers to a bear attack, and everything in between. The call was never made public, not my decision, but not one I necessarily complained about either. I never wanted to hear that recording again. I put in my 2 weeks notice that same night, though I never returned to work after that day. I'd been content to try and forget about that call. As callous as it may sound, I was content trying to forget about Amber, to forget whatever I had spoken to on that phone. But I don't think it's done with me. Last night, I dreamed, or had a thought I was dreaming the sounds of footsteps running throughout my house, as something screeched and laughed and mocked me just outside my bedroom door. I stayed in my bed long into the morning, despite the sound having stopped, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and confusion, until eventually, I convinced myself to leave the bed. I crossed the room, cursing every creak the floor made under my weight. I lowered myself to the ground, holding my breath as I peered under my bedroom door. There was something there, but it wasn't moving. I mustered up the little bravery I had left and rose to my feet, my eyes shut tight and prayer on my lips. I pulled open the bedroom door slightly and stuck my head out just enough to see what lay outside. I stifled a gasp, and tears flooded my eyes as I bent over to pick up the object. Placed right outside my door was a little pink bunny, covered in dark stains. From somewhere within the darkness, just beyond the bedroom door, Amber's laughter echoed. My normal shifts were during the day, 9 to 5 like most people, but on that day, we were shorthanded on the night shift staff because the last person who worked during those hours had just quit. We lately had a lot of people quitting the night shift, so that meant I had to cover. Weirdly enough, I had never had to work the graveyard shift before then, and I was actually excited for it. I had brought some coffee and 5-hour energy with me because the hours ran 10 to 5, and there was no way I'd make it that far naturally. I got to my tower right before 10, when it was already pitch black, and the cold July night had fully set in. The tower was fairly tall, with several flights of stairs leading up to the top. The whole thing was mostly surrounded by thick forest, except for the trail I came in from, in a murky pond that was just to the right of one of the tower's legs. The pond itself was covered in those little frog pads and had algae floating around over the surface. It was actually quite big for a natural lagoon. I climbed up, and all I could hear was the non-stop sounds of crickets, frogs, and the occasional owl. When I hit the top, I fumbled with my keys until I finally found the right one and walked right in. The one room was small and square-shaped. 3 of the walls were mostly glass, and the other one was opaque and had the door I just came in. The roof went up like a pyramid for a short length until it peaked, and it was all made of wood. To my left was a nicely made bed and a nightstand with a lamp and a flashlight on top. Not like I'd be using the bed though. On the wall next to that was the CB radio and communication stand, which every one of those towers had. Next to that sat my refrigerator and a microwave, which was part of a kitchen that extended to the other wall as well. Inside the kitchen on the right wall were several cabinets, some small ones that held snacks and some canned foods, and another set of giant cabinets that I couldn't open, which likely had vacuums and other cleaning supplies that were above my pay grade. Roomy. I went over to the communication stand and did my standard check to make sure everything was properly working. I called into the ranger station channel and said, "Well, Donnie, it looks like it's just you and me tonight." Donnie didn't say anything back, so I figured he was just taking a shit. I went and grabbed the flashlight on the stand and reached into one of its drawers, pulling out a set of binoculars from it. I went back out to the balcony and checked to make sure there was no fire hazards or any other kind of dangerous things were over there. Once I checked that box off my to-do list, I headed back inside and pulled out the chair from the communication stand and put it by one of the glass walls, and grabbed a granola bar from one of the kitchen cabinets to munch on. I put the binoculars up to my eyes and looked over the surrounding forest. It didn't seem like any animals were up and about, and no birds were in the sky either. I skimmed over a couple of clearings to make sure that no teenagers were off camping illegally. Then I went and peeked over at a far ridge, where I saw a snowman standing alone in a gap of trees. Hold the fuck up, it was July. I peeked again to see it wasn't a snowman, but some kid in a shitty ghost costume. It looked like the ones from Charlie Brown, with the big black holes for eyes that looked more like they were colored black than actual holes. The kid was still and staring right into my direction, unmoving. I couldn't see the kid's parents anywhere, and by now it was rolling up on 11, so that meant something was up. I broke contact on the kid and walked to the radio, calling into the station. "Donnie, you off the shitter yet?" "Barely made it out, but I'm here." I chuckled. Donnie was always good for a laugh. "There's some kid with a blanket walking around the southeast sector, and they look alone." "A blanket? What the hell are you talking about?" "It's a ghost costume. It's got the black holes for eyes and stuff." "You mean like the Charlie Brown coast? Can you check it out?" "Yeah. I'll go out and see what's up. I'll call in on my walkie-talkie to tell you what I see." "Roger that." I turned off the radio and crossed over to the nightstand drawer to grab the walkie-talkie. Once I had it, I sat back down in the chair and put my binoculars to my eyes, zooming into where the kid was. The ridge was empty, with no kid in sight, which I knew would make this 1,000 times harder. I pulled up the antenna on the walkie-talkie and dialed to the right channel. "Donnie, you hear me?" "Yup, loud and clear. I'm getting close to the sector. I'm heading up to a ridge for a vantage point." "Perfect. That's where I saw the kid, but they moved on since then." "Well, I'll just check around to see if I can find anything." I watched as Donnie came over the ridge, waving his flashlight around the dark, until he looked towards the tower and shrugged. "Nothing over here." "Damn. Hopefully he turns up again. Until then, I'll just notify the police and check with any missing reports." "Alright, I'll go back too." Donnie's voice cut out and I saw his flashlight turn off in the distance. The small lit up spot where he stood was swallowed in darkness. "Donnie, you there? Donnie!" I heard no response, and I rushed outside the door and around the corner to where I saw him, yelling his name, only to hear my voice echo into the woods, and that's when it hit me. There wasn't a single other sound in that entire forest. The crickets and frogs had stopped chirping. The wind didn't rustle through the leaves. Everything was completely standstill. I could hear my heartbeat throbbing in my ears and nothing else. I moved my flashlight around the woods for some futile attempt of finding him. I got into that state of mind where I got so scared my throat closed up, and if I moved, I felt like something very bad was going to happen. I had to do something now. I turned around, and as I did, I glanced at the stairs below me. At the bottom stood a skinny, horrifically angled woman. She was tall, dripping with water, with black hair and dark murky blue skin that stretched across her bent and broken bones. Her gray dress was shredded, and her black shoes were muddy and wet. In her face, her eyes were milky white, and her mouth hung wide open like a snake, like her jaw had been grossly broken. She let out a blood-curdling and ear-piercing scream of agony and began to shuffle up the stairs so fucking fast that I snapped out of my fear lock, and I ran the fuck back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. There was no way she could run that fast, even if all her bones weren't broken into wrong directions. I ran back into the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and then I pulled out the walkie-talkie, screaming into it. "Is anyone there? Donnie, where the fuck are you? Someone answer me, goddammit!" Then I heard the creaking of a door. I slowly turned, and I froze when I saw what was there. The door was still there, locked and shut, and had been completely undisturbed. What scared me was the once locked giant cabinet that now stood open, with a kid dressed like a Charlie Brown ghost standing just in front of it. I stood there, unmoving until I heard the little shit giggle. I recognized that giggle. No fucking way. I pulled off the sheet to see one of Donnie's kids, Marvin, sporting a smirk and a walkie-talkie. "Dad, Joey, I got him!" Ha! Pissed his pants just like I said he would, right? He and his other son laughed from the other end of the walkie. I was mad, but glad I wasn't about to get murdered in a wooden tower. I grabbed his walkie and shot back. "Pissed me off is what you did. I hope you're happy. Hearing you scream like a little girl sure did make me happy, alright." Yeah, screw you too. That wasn't even me. That was your stupid zombie chick. Who was that? Your wife? My what? Does the ghost look like a zombie from that far away? You said yourself it looked like Charlie. Not the ghost. The woman on the stairs. She screamed and ran up them so that she could scare me into the tower. Hell, she must be like an Olympic runner. Did you get Usain Bolt? Dean, I didn't put no woman on the stairs. I will tell you my story. It's not very long. It started a week ago. I don't know why or how. I didn't upset some witch, and I didn't go skinny dipping in a pool of nuclear waste or anything like that. Sometimes, terrible things happen without reason, and this is one of them. I shot awake at 12:42 a.m. with the urgent need to urinate. I waddled into the bathroom, pulled out my package, and just stood there. Nothing came out. Come on, buddy. I muttered to my member, "What's the deal? Thought you had to do some business here." No response. I gave it a little shake. Come on now, don't have all night. Big meeting in the morning. Gotta get some sleep. I was about ready to put it away and chug a glass of water when I felt a sharp stabbing pain in my inner thigh. It made me hunch over, and I smacked my forehead on the toilet lid. Fuck, I muttered, straightening out. I dropped my boxers in order to inspect what was going on down there. I thought maybe a pimple had burst or something like that. Gross. But not as gross as what I saw. Something was poking around under my skin. It looked like it was a crawling worm, twisting away just beneath the surface. Nope, I said. Just a little sleep deprivation. There's not really something moving inside of me. As if to prove me wrong, my flesh started stretching, like something inside was pushing it further and further outward. This event was accompanied by a flash of burning and unforgiving pain. I screamed and bucked all the way to the ground, arching my back like the letter C. My wife Jess called out from the bedroom a moment later. "Honey, everything okay in there? I told you not to eat the chili after you left it out all night." My daughter Allie joined in from her room. "Papa, you shouldn't have eaten that chili." "I'm okay," I lied. "Go back to sleep, girls." Then, as in the eye of a storm, everything settled down. I still felt like I had to pee, but the weird movement had stopped, but only for a moment. And the following moment brought with it a torrent of misery and horror unlike anything I had ever known. A fleshy knob burst from the inside of my thigh with a gush of pink slime. I had two thoughts in quick succession. First, it's a dick. Then, no, it's a nightmare. This isn't happening. As my mind was turning things over, my mouth was screaming again. I don't know how long that went on, but eventually Jess was banging at the door. "Henry, are you okay? Henry!" "Get a knife," I wailed. "Cut it off. Oh God, kill it, please." "I'm coming in," warned Jess. "No," I cried, but it was too late. She had opened the door, taken one look at the scene before her, and covered her mouth in shock. "I don't know what's happening," I sobbed. Then a jet of yellow fluid shot from the head of the thing, and I could no longer pretend that it wasn't a second penis. The physical release of the urine felt supremely satisfying, and for a split second, I felt actually content, until I felt the warmth of my own piss pool around my knees. "Is that?" started Jess. Yes, I said. "I don't know where it came from. Oh God, I'm a monster." "What do we do? Call 911? No, it's too embarrassing, and I'm so tired. I just want to go to sleep and deal with it in the morning. I got cleaned up and settled back into bed. I was actually able to sleep for a little bit. I think because of all the adrenaline burst wore me out. I had nightmares of dicks sprouting out all over my body. One coming out of my chest, one coming out of my forehead, dripping in brain, but I was able to sleep. In the morning, it was gone. Even though it would have been hard to miss, I still spent several minutes searching all the folds down there for some sign of it. "Where did it go?" asked Jess. "I don't know," I said, "but you did see it, right? That wasn't just some nightmare, right?" "Not unless two people can have the same nightmare." "Can they?" I wondered. "I guess it's possible. No less strange than another cock poking out of your thigh for the night and then disappearing, if you think about it." "True," I said thoughtfully. "Maybe it crawled off somewhere. Maybe it was some kind of alien monster that only took form of a cock." "Maybe," said Jess. "You better get moving. You're going to be late for your meeting." I did get ready, and I'll tell you this, I felt great. It felt great not having a random second penis flopping around on my body. It was one of the best feelings in the world. But that night, it came back. The second night was no picnic either, but nothing will ever be as terrifying to me as the first night. And I'll tell you the rest of the story. It's not so bad. After it was accepted that this was going to keep happening every night, it's not so bad at all. There's a saying that I consider one of the wisest among sayings. It goes like this: happy wife, happy life. And well, let me put it like this: I have a very happy wife. It was all so wonderful in the beginning. I just got on a new job as a builder for a private contractor. This was back in the day when slasher flicks were still big in the theaters and hairspray was used by all. Me and the rest of the crew went over to the boss's house to load some supplies that was dropped off there. Normally, these would have been delivered to the job site, but the schedule was wonky. This was how I met her. Just as we were loading up the last few sheets of drywall onto the trailer, she poked her head out onto the back patio where the shadow of the overhead awning blotted out the sun and hid her in the shadow. She was wearing sunglasses too big for her face and a sun hat that flopped with each step she took. She was wearing a silky dark robe. The moment the robe hit the concrete lining the pool, I was in love. Her two-piece swimsuit could hardly contain what was underneath. She lowered herself into the pool slowly. Her chest fought against the water like a set of flotation devices. I swear, I don't think I could have drowned her if I wanted to. She was my boss's daughter. He caught me looking and approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Let's get back to work, eh?" His thick sausage fingers dug into my collarbone just enough to let me know. We were married later that summer and things were fine. She was the sort of girl that took care of her skin. I remember that much. Kids were in the cards for us, it seemed. She assured me it was alright. After her dad got the big C, I took over the business and things seemed to be alright in the beginning. But stress takes its toll, and the longer I worked, the rounder her bottom became. The once bulbous apple there was replaced by a pair of mushy hams. Even without children, she'd been cursed with a mom butt. Her hair, God, that lovely hair I once ran my fingers through was replaced by a weird angular bob cut. All the trips to the tanning bed made it so her skin felt like a crusted leather. The veins on her chest were a more vibrant blue than ever before, and she was quickly developing what I'll call here the waddle problem beneath her chin. At restaurants, she would send her steak back if it was too overdone or too underdone. I used to think no steak on this green earth existed that would quill to her wrath. These days, I know different. Whenever this would happen, I would smile to the server, hoping to communicate. Please don't spit in my food. I didn't do anything. But of course, my anxiety was such that I'd pick at my food for the remainder of the night out, examining each pool of moisture on the meat to see if it looked too bubbly and white. I eventually renovated the basement as a place for me to find some respite from the overbearing woman. This didn't last long as her ever-changing interests and hobbies grew. The upstairs was no longer large enough to contain them. I stopped going down there. I didn't want to see what the screams came from. They would keep me up, rattling in my ears, so that I would cry myself to sleep. It became so that I'd walk on eggshells everywhere I went in the home, terrified of what she might do to me, as she would stomp through the house in tandem with my pondering heart. As the screams in the basement grew louder, so did my own. In the night, I'd be frozen stiff, mortified as I watched her side of the room. We slept in separate beds, but sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of grinding. I'd open my eyes and see her hunched over her bed with her back facing me. The following morning, I'd see my electric sander sitting on the floor near her bed. She would have 2 perfect circles beneath her eyes where she stripped her flesh to expose the red blood, the white bone, the infected tissue. This was a more permanent substitute to Rogue. I suppose she thought it went well with the doll powder blue-eyed makeup she used. I don't know. I started taking long drives after work as means to keep myself out of the house and away from her horrifying piercing eyes. It made me sick what she'd do, but I was too scared to leave. I'd find myself parking the car in some new secluded place I'd found and stepped out to scream at the infinite night sky. Then I would return home and she would be waiting on me, question after question, locked and loaded. I would muffle something about paperwork and go to my bed. But the screams from the basement leaked into my nightmares. It was all too much. I could hardly look at my wife. She was a monster. A totally different person than I'd met all those years ago. She began wearing human skin suits, and I no longer had to wonder of the origins of those screams. With some new face, she greeted me every morning. She stocked the fridge with jars of a thick red substance. I worked in a slaughterhouse once when I was in high school. I know that smell. It's the smell that creeps up through the cracks in the floor. It's the smell coming off her breath. I can't stand it. It makes me sick. I couldn't go on living like that. After a long day at work, followed by a longer drive home, I found my way to our doorstep, not wanting to go in. I knew what I was going to do. It wouldn't be easy, but I'm sure a divorce would come as a welcome surprise. We'd both be better off for it. I felt like falling to pieces right there on the welcome mat. I wanted to run away. How long would it be before she turned those insatiable hobbies on me? My hand reached for the doorknob. I watched my hand continue to shake as I willed it to steady. My heart was pounding in my ears. Sickness welled in my chest. It burned. I was going to throw up. Before I could do anything, there she was, whipping the door open. She was decked in a full skin suit, sewn together in the places it had torn wrong. It felt like she towered over me. She did not speak, but merely grunted and put out her cupped hands to show off the newest thing she made. It was a mask. It was for me. My skin crawled. I couldn't even look at it. I tried pushing it away. She lifted the hollowed out head, skin, and slammed it over my face. I peered through the eye holes, not thinking of whatever poor bastard it had been taken from. It was a waking nightmare. The things I could only ever have dreamed of were happening. It's so hard to breathe. I take it off when she's not looking. I can't help it. The stench. I can't leave. She won't let me. The dark web. The name itself is a meme. It's become the boomer boogeyman, the back alley of the internet where you go to get your kidneys harvested and sold off to billionaires all-you-can-torture buffet. It's the skeezy part of town, the no man's land of the digital world, chock full of society's most vile scum. It's also pretty boring. See, the dark web really isn't that much different than the surface web. Sure, it has a cooler name and better privacy, but most people use it for the same shit. Social media? Check. Shopping? Check. Pirating movies? Duh. Did you know Facebook exists on the dark web? You do now. My parents are terrified of the dark web. They speak about it hushed breaths, sorta like Ron Weasley talks about Lord Voldemort. It's as though they think uttering its name too loudly will invoke the wrath of some serial hacker, just waiting in the wings to delete their bank accounts. Ridiculous, right? I told them they were paranoid. To prove them wrong, I even downloaded the Tor browser and uninstalled Google Chrome. There's nothing to fear on the dark web, I said, so long as you've got half a brain's worth of sense in you. Now I wish I could take it all back. I stumbled across the website after a long night of drinking. I'd been out with Jared, my best friend since childhood, reminiscing about the good old days of driving Miss Crabtree up the wall. When I got home, I felt a bit nostalgic, so I went digging for old pictures on Facebook. Like most drunk missions, one thing led to another, and I landed on an old thread listing the most exciting websites on the dark web. Most were fairly vanilla. Some free textbooks here, a bit of hacked video games there. I scrolled down through the responses until I found one buried beneath the others. It had just a single upvote, monstercall.onion. I stared at the link for a few seconds, then cracked a fresh beer and said fuck it. The website was plain, mostly white text on a black background. Across the top was a banner emblazoned with the words "Call your monsters." I cracked a grin. It was kinda cute, in an edgelord, emo kinda sorta way. After clicking through a few menu links, I landed on the Order a Monster page. It said that for $99, they would deliver a personalized monster to a doorstep of my choice. Free shipping too. The flavor text read, "Perfect for getting even with terrible bosses, backstabbing friends, and childhood enemies." I laughed. The idea was absolute gold. They even had a monster call guarantee of same-day shipping. How they managed to pull that off, I had no idea. Maybe they had a network of paid actors, patiently waiting to dress up in Halloween costumes and say a few canned lines on somebody's doorstep. Or maybe it's like Build-A-Bear, where you got to design your own stuffed version of ghouls like Dracula and the Wolfman. Whatever it was, I decided I was far too drunk to give a shit about how they made it happen. All I knew was $100 was a damn steal. I smashed the order button and it brought me to the follow-up page titled, "Design Your Monster." I practically licked my lips. This was the juicy bit. The website gave me a drop-down list of selectable options based on modifiable body parts. The mouth, for instance, had fangs, broken teeth, no mouth, multiple mouths, and too many teeth. I thought the idea of too many teeth sounded ridiculous enough to be awesome, so I picked that and went down the list and selected the rest of the monster's attributes, including its body type, its subspecies, and finally its power. The next page said leave a message. I mulled it over for a few minutes before deciding to keep it simple. I typed "boo" into the text field. Once I was finished, I clicked complete and it brought me to a new screen that made me jump. It was a webcam video of me, staring shocked at my laptop. The stream was live. At the top of the page, a red text banner proclaimed "Perform the blood sacrifice." I cocked an eyebrow. What? As if in answer to my confusion, a list of instructions faded into view on the bottom of the screen. Number 1. Utter the name of your recipient. 2. Pierce your skin. 3. Consume your blood. I burst out laughing. This was too wild. Not only were they gonna deliver a monster to somebody's doorstep, but they were gonna include a goofy ritual video too. Alright, I decided, I'm game. I went downstairs and grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and headed back up to my room. Holding my hand up with a coy grin, I pricked my thumb with the tip of the blade. "Jared Mayhew," I announced dramatically. I stuffed my blood thumb into my mouth and sucked it clean. Then I held it up, drunk and proud, as evidence of my dark ritual complete. Seconds passed and nothing happened. Then, the screen went black and a new page appeared. Order complete. Delivery in progress. I sipped my beer, wondering how Jared would react to my spooky surprise landing on his doorstep tomorrow. I really hope they included the blood sacrifice bit. Jared and his wife, Alyssa, both hated blood, so they'd never let me live it down, and that was exactly what I wanted. A couple seconds later, a new screen popped up. Delivery complete. Stand by for results. Already? That didn't make any sense. How did they manage to create my order and ship it across the country, all in the span of 5 minutes? A depressing realization swept over me. My drunk ass had been duped. There was no way they'd be able to ship something that quickly. So the only explanation was A, it was a scam, or B, it was just some lame email jump scare. Fuck. Now the $99 made more sense. There was no way a tiny startup could offer the same-day delivery and a compelling product for so little money. It was a pipe dream logistically. Defeated, I decided that was enough dark web shopping for one night and time to pack it in. I closed my laptop, brushed my teeth, and hopped into bed. My phone vibrated. I stared at it, wondering who would be messaging me at this hour. Jared, maybe? He's just as drunk as I was and probably high as a kite by now too. I picked it up and saw one new email from Monster Call. Odd. I never gave them an email address. Order delivered. Click here to view results. This was either a virus or some guarantee that Jared got a corny, spooky email. Still drunk, still making poor decisions, I clicked the link and it opened a video feed of Jared's house. I sat up, my tiredness vanishing in a tidal wave of what the fuck. The video was dimly lit, and the way it bobbed up and down looked like it was being recorded off somebody's cell phone. Jared's small, 2-bedroom home was there in all of its suburban glory. Something about the video felt off though. Wrong. I told myself to relax. This was just some prank or gag. The company probably put on a call for a fraction of the money to any locals, and somebody pulled the contract. No doubt they were going to walk up to the front steps, knock on his door, and then say boo and run off or some shit. It wasn't a big deal, so why was my heart racing? The video neared the house, the footsteps going slowly. In the silence of the night, I heard the person behind the camera breathing. They sounded frightened, scared. Why? Lights went on inside the house, painting the windows in a dull yellow glow. I squinted, seeing dark shapes darting behind the curtains. Thoroughly confused, I decided to message Jared and ask if he got my surprise. Terrence. Sup, dude? You get my special delivery? Haha. Jared. Help. Jared. Something. Jared. Inside the house. Dark splotches splattered against the curtains. A moment later, a woman's scream rang out, and the window shattered. Two hands reached out from behind the billowing curtains, gripping the side of the windowsill. Then two more gripped the top. A figure emerged, lurching out of the opening and into the yard. It looked familiar. Jesus Christ, it looked familiar. It stood 8 feet tall, with large bat wings flared out behind it, and 4 crooked, muscular arms clenching in and out of fist. The person behind the camera stumbled backward, muttering something incoherent. The creature swiveled its head toward them. The video feed shifted. Images of the sidewalk flew up and down as the cameraman ran full tilt from Jared's house. I caught muffled fragments of prayers. Then a shriek sounded, followed by the flap of powerful wings. The video crashed, tumbling in a blur of pixels. A man's voice shouted for help, and then something heavy crunched, and his voice died with a wheeze. Another shriek filled the night, and a shadow appeared, gazing down towards the cell phone. It had 4 arms, a pair of wings, and a mouth filled with rows and rows of teeth. Too many teeth. I lurched forward, swallowing the vomit in my throat. In one of the creature's arms was a 30-something man, struggling wordlessly against the monster's might. His chest looked like it had been caved in. The creature leaned towards him, pressing his teeth against his face, and slowly bit down. The man's legs kicked and jolted as the beast's teeth began rotating like a blender, tearing his flesh from his skull. It dropped him there, convulsing and dying, then beat its great wings and took off into the sky. Moments later, I heard confused shouts. Footsteps pounded against the pavement. More hollers. People called for the police. I put my phone down, horrified. It had to have been a joke. There simply was no way that it had actually happened. It couldn't have. It was too gruesome, too violent. That was digital effects all the way. It had to be. They were great at those these days, weren't they? The next day I got a call from Jared's parents. His mother tried to talk, but she couldn't get past the tears, so she put Jared's father on the line. He explained that something terrible happened last night. My heart slammed in my chest. What happened? I asked. I told myself to relax, that there was nothing to worry about. Monsters didn't exist. I knew that. Terrence, he said quietly. This isn't easy to talk about, and it's harder to hear. But last night, somebody broke into Jared and Alyssa's home. Police think it was sometime around 2 in the morning. My jaw hung limp, my hand trembling as I held the phone to my ear. A terrible coincidence. That's all it was. A terrible, horrible coincidence. I don't know how to say this, he said, so I'm just gonna come right out with it. He took a deep breath, shuddering breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was as fragile as glass. The intruder that broke in, he mutilated them. Mutilated? I said in a small voice. Oh my God, Jesus. Yes, I'm sorry to tell you all this, but you were you were best friends, and I think it's better that you hear this from me than the newspaper." He paused, as though summoning the courage to say the next words. According to the police, the psychopath that broke in gnawed their faces off. Vomit rose in my stomach. I forced it down. "Oh Christ, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I ran a hand through my hair, gripping it forcefully and pulling on it, praying the pain would wake me from this nightmare. "Please, Roger, let me handle the funeral preparations. You and Charlene should take this time to grieve. That's the thing," Roger said, his voice tremoring with emotion. "There won't be a funeral." "What?" "They're still alive. Terrence, that son of a bitch, left them, broken and bleeding, to live with the torture he influenced on them." He choked back a sob before recomposing himself. "So far there's no trace of the bastard. The only lead the cops have is a crumpled note they found on the doorstep." "He left a note?" "Yeah, but it was just one word. Practically useless." I swallowed. "What did it say?" "Boo." I didn't plan to tell anyone about this, much less anonymous users on an internet forum. But I've seen the other posts, and I have to come forward. I got pregnant at Disneyland, and gave birth there 2 days later. "Splash Mountain," Kenny said, pointing up to the sign. "You really liked it yesterday. Wanna ride it again?" "Yesterday? We didn't go on that yesterday." Yeah we did." I shrugged. "Okay, sure." I didn't want to get into an argument with Kenny. It was our honeymoon, after all. As we entered, nothing looked familiar to me. Not the path through the cave, not the hollowed out tree trunk. And waiting in line wasn't exactly fun. I heard a father shouting, "Rini, get over here," a few times, breaking the mood. And this tall man, wearing a fedora, kept staring at me. He kinda creeped me out. We finally hit the front of the line. The water lapped around the sides of the boat. A thin drizzle of rain fell through the openings of the fake cave. Thunder rumbling in the background, distant and eerie. I didn't think it was supposed to storm. I thought. I checked the weather and it was sunny and 82 degrees. "How many?" the cast member asked, but then his dark eyes lit with recognition. "Oh, it's you guys again. Enjoying your honeymoon?" I just stood there, at a loss for words. If we didn't go on this ride yesterday, how come he remembers us? We climbed into the boat. Front row this time, Kenny said excitedly, looking around at the water. But his voice sounded muffled, far away. The thunder rumbled again, closer this time. The pattering rain drummed in my ears, like the throbbing of my heart. Chink, chink, chink. The boats climbed the hill, entering a cave tunnel. The sounds faded into the distance. As we sped down the other side, I felt a wave of nausea. "Kara, are you okay?" I nodded, but as we twisted around the curve, I felt it again. I took in a deep breath of fresh air. Just motion sickness, I bet. We slowly floated around a fake briar patch. I stared at it, trying to swallow the urge to vomit. The thick brown vines curled around each other. Thorns and leaves ran their length, adding realistic detail. Except for one. No, one was just a plain brown vine tangled up with all the rest. as I stared at it, wondering why the Disney artist had neglected that one vine. I saw it move. It wriggled in the water, almost worm-like, almost snake-like. I couldn't make out a head or a tail, a beginning or an end. The briar patch was swept out of view, and the boat careened through another fake cave. "Are you okay?" Kenny asked, but his voice sounded so far away. My eyes fell on more of the briars poking through the cave ceiling. One didn't have thorns. As I felt the vomit rise in my throat, the world faded to black. "You're pregnant." I half expected the doctor to give me a tiny set of Mickey Mouse ears, or one of those big plastic buttons they give out on birthdays and anniversaries, saying, "I'm pregnant." He was a doctor for Disneyland guests, after all. But he didn't. He just smiled. "You're about 2 months along, I'd say." 2 months. I glanced over at Kenny. That's not possible. I had my period. I drank alcohol. And most importantly, Kenny and I had only been married for 3 days. We'd need to order a full ultrasound to get an exact due date, but that's my guess. He tucked the ultrasound probe away. "Now, is there anything else I can do for you?" "No." As we left, he didn't even tell me to have a magical day. He instead hurried over to the phone and began frantically dialing a number on his phone. Must be a busy life being a Disneyland doctor. When we got to the car, the fight erupted. "Explain this to me, Kara," Kenny said. His voice was biting, hurt, angry. "You're pregnant. You've been pregnant for months, but we just got married 3 days ago. What are you implying? Do I need to say it?" He turned into the hotel parking lot. The silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. This has always been a sore point with Kenny. He'd saved himself for marriage. I didn't. I slept with a few boyfriends in college, but I agreed to his little shtick. Agreed not to have sex with him until our wedding night. Apparently, that was a mistake. Clearly, the doctor's just wrong, I said. I swung the car door open. The warm night air blew over my face, through my hair. There's no other way. I didn't cheat on him. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tempted to. Cutting out all sex for a year and a half is hell of a thing, but I didn't do it. Kenny was silent. We went to bed without so much as a kiss. Kenny fell asleep in 15 minutes. I tossed and turned for an hour. At about 3 a.m., I woke up in the middle of the night to pee. I climbed out of bed. It was difficult. My body felt heavier, somehow. Must be sore from all the walking in the park yesterday. I walked into the bathroom, flicked on the light. I looked in the mirror and screamed. My stomach was round and full, stretching thin the fabric of my tank top. It bumped the countertop, even though I was standing a foot or two away. I looked 6 or 7 months pregnant. Muffled thumps came from the other room as Kenny climbed out of bed. "Kara? Kara, what's wrong?" He found me in a crumpled heap on the floor sobbing, my arms covering my distended abdomen. I slowly removed them. I don't know what's happening," I sobbed. He lifted me from the floor, his hands on my belly. "We have to get you to a hospital," he said, still staring. And then the thing kicked. My whole belly convulsed. Kenny pulled his hands away immediately, as if I was too hot to touch. Then came the pain. A sharp, intense cramp started in my lower back and radiating to my stomach. I screamed again, and Kenny held me tight. Thump, thump, thump. A knock at the door. Thank God. We hobbled over. Kenny pulled the door open. Please, call 911. My wife, she's... He stopped. On the other side of the door were not fellow hotel guests checking in if we were okay. No. They were some sort of operatives, officials, dressed in black suits, grim expressions on their faces. They grabbed us before we could blink, roughly pulled us by the shoulders down the carpeted hallway. I watched the paintings of Mickey Mouse go by, blurred through my tears. Where are you taking us? Kenny screamed. No reply, save for the ding of the elevator. They pulled us inside. We rocketed down. 3, 2, 1, B1, B2. The floors raced by on the screen. There weren't any floors beyond B2. No more buttons. Still, the elevator kept going down. My ears popped with the descent. When the doors finally parted, we were looking into a dark hallway, extended for miles. Take them to the park. The tallest operative commanded. We've got work to do. I'd almost given up on love. After 5 years of pointless scrolling, it was time to face the facts. Girls just weren't interested in nice guys like me. But then a notification popped up one morning. It's a match. Irene had soft eyes and curling brown hair that fell about her shoulders. Her smile was shy, with a hint of mischief. I thought long and hard about my opening line. I had to both strike the proper tone and make her feel special. Hi, you seem interesting. Like someone I'd like to know better. Not like all the other girls on here. She replied a few minutes later. That's so sweet of you to say. You seem pretty interesting yourself. Smiley face. Do you live alone? After a flirtatious back and forth, I asked her out to dinner. I'd love to, but I'm working late. I'll be so hungry when my shift ends. If only I knew a handsome gentleman who could cook. Winky face. I waited for almost a full minute before replying, so as not to appear desperate. Why don't you come over to my place tonight? I'm a great cook. Irene replied, sounds good, X. Boom. Just like that, I had a date. I bought a mop and vacuum to clean the apartment with and lit a few candles to set the mood. Irene messaged at about 10 p.m. I'm outside. She was early. There was no time for a shower, and I couldn't find a single can of deodorant. Luckily, I bathed 3 days earlier. Crisis averted. I put on the Avatar The Last Airbender original soundtrack, then dimmed the lights. I made my way to the front door, stopped at the mirror to straighten my tie, then turned the handle. Whenever I saw Irene, my heart skipped a beat. Her gray-green eyes glimmered like emeralds, and her intoxicating aroma reminded me of a freshly opened pack of Pokemon cards. She was wrapped in multiple layers of clothing, barely showing any skin at all. A rare virtue in a Western woman. Aren't you going to invite me in? She said eventually. Her voice was confident, yet somehow submissive. I swept a hand across the apartment and tipped my fedora. My lady. Irene kept her coat on as I guided her towards the dining room. She took a seat at my Secret Lab Omega 2020 series gaming chair while I sat facing her on a wooden one the previous owners left behind when they moved out. I asked Irene about her work, her family, and her sexual history. She gave short, curt answers to all of my questions. Periodically, her stomach grumbled. It was rather unladylike, although I held my tongue. She surveyed the room. Are we alone? Yup. I smiled. It's just the two of us. Her eyes focused on mine. Perfect. The way she said it sent my heart rate soaring. At one point, I excused myself to begin preparing the meal. Then we resumed chatting. As we talked, Irene propped her head up using her arm and leaned forward, seductively. What's that thing? With a gloved hand, she gestured past my left shoulder, towards a katana mounted across the wall. Oh, it's a Japanese sword, crafted by a master smith in Yokohama. I turned back towards her. If you're lucky, perhaps I'll give you a little demonstration later. A few minutes later, right as I was in the middle of explaining Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for life, the microwave dinged. Excuse me. I served Irene's portion first, bowing as I laid it before her. Bon appetit. The Hot Pockets turned out sweet and delectable. A thick celebration of cheese, meat, and vegetables. But while I scoffed mine down, Irene only eyed her plate with disdain. I swallowed a mouthful. Is everything okay? She bit her bottom lip and nodded as her stomach grumbled, even louder than before. I shrugged and continued eating. By the time I was finished, she'd hardly taken a single bite. What's the matter? I asked, a tone of concern in my voice. She rubbed her belly. I'm not really in the mood for... Her voice trailed off as she prodded the Hot Pocket with her fork. I'm in the mood for... something else. She stood, circled the computer desk, and gently pressed a finger against my lips. Before I knew it, we were kissing. Irene swung over onto my lap. Our tongues acted in perfect synchronization, like Goku and Vegeta performing the fusion dance. Anticipation swelled beneath my cargo shorts. I'd been looking forward to this moment for 36 years. Irene bit my bottom lip, hard. I grimaced with pain and pulled back. Then a trickle of blood rained down my chin. She gave me a nasty smile, showing a mouthful of curved teeth, and licked her lips with a forked tongue. You taste good. Irene stood and began undressing. For a moment, it appeared as though things were looking up. Although her monstrous teeth were repulsive, I still considered Irene attractive. But then, before my horrified eyes, her clothes fell to the ground. From the neck down, Irene's body was covered with translucent skin, grotesquely colored, stretched taut over well-defined bones. Bat-like wings spanning no less than thrice the width of her body expanded. Then she pulled off her gloves, revealing long, sharp claws. A set of small, yet perfectly shaped breasts sat proudly atop her chest. My knees trembled as Irene leaned in close. Before I could react, her cold claw wrapped around my neck and lifted me from my chair, pinning me against the wall. I made a faint rasp and tried to pry her fingers off my neck. Irene's tongue probed my face as she moaned with what I assumed to be feminine delight. The edge of my vision blurred, and my temples started throbbing. Desperately, I felt along the wall, probing for something, anything, that could help. My left hand touched something metal, the katana. In one smooth motion, I grabbed it off the wall and angled it downward. The sheath fell to the floor. Irene's jaw closed around my neck, puncturing the flesh. I screamed, then twisted the blade around and thrust it into her back, right between the shoulder blades. She made a sudden cry of pain and relinquished her grip. Irene whirled around, shrieking. The blade tore a strip of flesh as I ripped it out, Before I could strike a second time, Irene flapped her wings. The left one collided with my chest, knocking me clean across the table. The jolt of the impact made me groan. Red lines trickled down my neck, stemming from the point where Irene bit me. I scrambled back to my feet, katana in hand. Irene bared her fangs. The computer desk stood between us. "Why you?" she said with fury. Green blood blossomed from her back. I took several short, quick breaths. "What the fuck is going on here?" I stammered. "Isn't it obvious?" A horrible grin broke out on Irene's face. The end of the blade wobbled in my unsteady hand. She circled to my right. I turned to follow, keeping the desk between us. "I'm here to eat you. I stalked dating sites for horny losers like you, and then I gobbled them up." Irene burst forward. A desperate flail of my blade sent her whining back. I gulped. "Gobble up? Just what the hell are you? Explain yourself." Irene leaned forward. "It doesn't matter what I am. All that matters is what you are." "Oh," I said, then gulped. "And what's that?" She grinned. "A fat 30-year-old virgin who's about to be dinner." "Like hell I'm about to be dinner," I shouted. I tried a slash, but Irene jerked back, just out of reach, and the silver blade cut only air. She took another swipe at me. I backed up a step. She swiped again and again, finding only the space above the desk. I held my breath and steadied my arms. All I had to do was watch my opponent for an opening. Each time Irene got ready to strike, her muscles tensed. That was it. The next time her muscles contracted, a delicate stroke sent her fingers flying through the air. She growled like a wounded orc and staggered back. While Irene clutched her hand and squealed, I slipped around the desk, ready to deliver a finishing blow. Her eyes focused on me with murderous intent. With her uninjured hand, Irene lashed out, forcing me backward. I answered her attacks with strikes of my own. Once, twice, a testing. There was a loud whoosh as Irene spread her wings and flew forward. "No!" I screamed, swinging wildly. The blade cut across her stomach. Anguished wails followed. Irene hit me with a meaty thump. Then we both spilled onto the floor. The katana landed between us. We both grabbed for it at the exact same moment, me getting there first. I rose. Irene looked up at me, my blade poised, calm, and ready. Green liquid pumped out of the deep wound in her stomach. She clutched it with both hands, jaws clenched. She was defeated. We both knew it. Her strength was no match for my prowess. Those countless hours cutting open bottles of Mountain Dew in my mom's backyard had not been in vain. Irene stumbled to her feet. Glistening green blood and ribbons of taut flesh dangled from where my strikes had connected. I held the katana firm with both hands. Irene's wings collapsed into her back. Then she began pulling on her clothes. Still only half dressed, she made her way towards the door. She looked back towards me with a look of utter disdain. I chuckled in response. The door crashed shut behind her. In the bathroom, I unrolled toilet paper and dabbed my wound. I stared at my reflection with pure disbelief. What were the odds my first ever date would turn out to be a hideous monster? It had undoubtedly been the second worst date of my entire life. On the counter, my phone chimed. It's a match. Excitement swelled in my stomach. The girl I matched with, Alice, was even more beautiful than Irene. Her skin was like mocha cappuccino, very exotic, very sexy. Sitting down to feast on the still warm Hot Pockets Irene had forgone, I sent Alice a message. Hi, you seem interesting, like someone I'd like to know better, not like all the other girls on here. If I'd known further terrors lay ahead, I would have uninstalled the app right then and there, but like a fool, I didn't. After all, what were the odds of something like that happening again? Shout out to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Casey, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I really look forward to making more content for everyone.